If you put the chariot before the horse, or if you misprioritize economic principles and practices that will guarantee certain levels of success, you're never going to get there. And let me just segue with these 5 by saying, you're listening to someone who was raised poor, okay? Both of my parents were crack addicts. Y'all heard my story, my testimony. Some of you are familiar with it. I'm a 70s baby, raised in South Florida. Both of my parents addicted to cocaine at the time, and of course, in the late 70s, they started freebasing, which turned into what we knew as the crack epidemic. My grandmother, who was an old German Jewish woman living in a predominantly black community, decided to take 3 biracial children. I was the middle child, I have 2 sisters, and raise us. So, of course, being raised in extreme poverty, it was just horrible. But for me as a child, it was hard for me to understand life. And so I just wandered around until about 11 or 12 when I got introduced to drugs. And from there, my life took a spiral until I got saved. As some of you have heard my testimony, in a trap house 2 months shy of turning 21. Actually, on Saturday, October the 11th, 1997, this October will be 25 years that I've been saved. But up until that point, I just lived life the way every other street thug and gangster and hustler and criminal lived. In and out of jail, homeless, just doing whatever it is that I wanted to do as a vagabond. But once I got saved, I started realizing real quick that the same economic, systemic issues that we lived by in the streets and in the hood, everybody was living by in the church. Everybody was struggling, everybody was broke, and everybody had scriptures to justify and make sense of why they were struggling and broke. And so it was at that point that I started my own personal journey to figure out, okay, this is just not going to work for me. I mean, I can go out there and get me a 50 pack and make $100. Like, I just can't live like this. And it was very difficult for me because at the time, there were not a lot of people in the church that I was around that really understood financial literacy. They didn't understand economics. They didn't understand entrepreneurship. It was actually a testimony back then when someone left the world. They were no longer in the secular world, and so they would come into church and testify. I just quit my job, and I'm no longer in the world. I'm full-time in ministry, and I'm like, but now you're struggling in here, and we're looking at that as a testimony. And so it really wasn't until my wife and I got married in 2003, almost 19 years ago, that we decided that we were going to put together a 2-person team, and we was going to make something. And my wife was behind me. And again, for me, I don't have a formal education. I dropped out of school several times. Finally, when I dropped out of school, I was kind of forced by someone who just kept visiting me in jail, saying, when you get out this time, you just at least need to go get your GED. And so I knew I was going to have to educate myself. I knew that if there was one strength I had the strength of resilience. I was not going to give up. I had overcome so much in life, should have been dead, should have been doing life in prison. And at the time, we didn't have technology. So it was Encyclopedia Britannicas or the book section at Goodwill. And that's how I started my personal professional financial journey, by just brain dumping and learning everything that I possibly